Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Gaming Mix podcast, your official podcast from analogstickgaming.com. If you don't know me by now, my name is Jordan, and to my left, as always, actually, no, I'm just used to saying that. Jeff is now on my right, the founder of Analog Stick Gaming. And if you're watching this episode and seeing the fancy overlay and seeing the title of the episode, you now know why Jeff was very excited in the previous episode
Oh yeah.
and a little distracted. So, why is that, Jeff? Why were you very excited?
The Emperor protects, Jordan. The Emperor protects. So this is basically going to be our kind of like review episode for Warhammer 40K Space Marine 2.
Yes.
So the embargo, by the time that this video gleams your eyes, the embargo will be up.
We are recording this just a couple of hours before the embargo. Well, less than that actually at this point. And the early access version of the game will be releasing tomorrow, the 5th of September, for those that have the Ultimate Edition and things like that. So you'll be playing it very, very soon. And I think you'll probably be happy, but we'll get into all of that in a moment. I just want to start by saying, thank you to our PR contact who provided us codes. Jeff played the game on Xbox, I played it on PC. So we've got a good amount of coverage here for you. Jeff has been able to play a significant part of the game more than me, but I've finished at least what you would call the main campaign, and we'll get into what all of that means in a moment. But Jeff, for people that don't know what this game is, how would you describe it?
I mean, a lot of people are going to kind of draw the comparisons to like Gears of War. But here's the thing: Gears of War is inspired by Warhammer, clearly. So I mean, like this is kind of like a return to like kind of what Warhammer is in regards to like the Space Marines. I mean, this is a sequel to Warhammer Space Marine, which came out in 2011. It's also a sequel to Warhammer Boltgun, which is kind of like a Doom shooter, pretty much. Very, very light connective tissue. It's mostly around the artifact in terms of Boltgun. But this is a sequel to Warhammer Space Marine. It basically plays kind of like if you took Gears of War and mashed it up against Saber Interactive's previous game, which was World War Z. So it's kind of like taking those games and just combining them together. Because the Tyranid threat is everywhere, and there's like you'll see like just a sea of like Hummergrunts like just coming at you, and it's just insane. But it is a third-person shooter, a melee as well too. There's a strong focus on that, and
and we'll get into all of that. But you actually hit there on one of the main things I want to talk about with this game, and where I'm going to start, because I do mention it in my review. I think that, some people may not realize, but this is actually a very linear game. It's level based and it is very linear. But one of the things I say in my review is it's one of the only linear games that I've played where it still has a massive sense of skill.
Mm-hmm.
And that's similar to World War Z, because I think it is. You will see these scenes where there's literally hundreds of enemies coming at you, and they tower up on walls and that kind of thing, and they're trying to get up to you, and it is just a little bit terrifying at times because you really can get surrounded quite easily, and this game at times can be very difficult as a result of that. But man, it's so fun to play, especially the melee combat. One of my favorite things, and I mentioned this in the review as well, is that in the melee combat, when you sort of stun an enemy or damage them enough, you can do an execution. And these things are so visceral, it's crazy.
Or even like if you like kind of use your parry to like stun them a different way, and then they have a little like target reticle on their head, and then it just cuts to like this cinematic like
gunshot. Yeah,
and
yeah,
then
the
like
quick
you just
shot. Yeah.
yeah, it's
One thing I noticed
fantastic.
last night as well when I was playing with our good friend Keith Mitchell from the Outer Haven, because I am actually reviewing the game for the Outer Haven. I wasn't originally, but Keith was away at PAX, so it kind of worked out quite nicely that I had access to the game as well. And we will have some additional coverage over on the Outer Havens YouTube channel, so make sure you go and subscribe over there as well. But we were playing, and one thing I noticed that I didn't know was possible until this happened was, you know how, so in the game as you're playing, you will get these parryable attacks that are signified to you by like a blue circle around the enemy just before they attack, and you press the left bumper on Xbox to parry that attack. But what I was really impressed by last night was I wasn't even facing the enemy,
Yeah,
and I
you don't have to face. You
blue
just have to tap
arrow
the button.
show up, and I still pressed it, and he just turned around and grabbed them, and it
Yeah,
was
like
like,
because like
that's so cool.
essentially, if you have say like one of the homogrants, and I'm probably saying the word wrong. It's one of the Tyranids. They're the ones that are almost kind of like a xenomorph in a lot of ways. If one of
Yes.
them like leaps at you and you tap that button and when it's blue, they'll turn, grab the throat, and then slam it down on the ground, or they'll grab the throat and the tail and then just break them apart. And if
Yeah.
you use the screenshot button when that happens, it's just literally like someone just like splattered jam against the wall, and it's just
Yeah,
everywhere.
it's so graphic,
It's
but in the
so
best
great.
way. And I will say, I still think that for people who maybe aren't familiar with Warhammer but are into gaming, Gears of War is a good point of comparison for much of this game. But obviously, this isn't a cover-based shooter, right?
No,
It's
Space Marines are
something
built to be
very
durable.
different.
They don't need cover. They are cover.
Yeah, you can, and that's one thing I'll say. I've never felt so powerful in a video game. Like,
Well, yeah,
I'll
like you're
go
wearing
into
armor that is like weighs as much as like 3 Buicks.
yeah,
Like, and so
yeah.
like the thing with Warhammer Space Marine 2 is it feels chunky. It feels like you are literally like gravity is doing its job and it's pulling you down to the ground. You
It
aren't
feels very
leaping and
weighted.
dodge rolling.
That's how I describe it in my review. Is everything is very weighted, from the movement to the way that you swing your melee weapons.
Yeah.
It just all feels very weighted and impactful as a result. Like, everything you do feels impactful.
Mm.
Um, I really enjoyed this game. Like,
Yeah,
and if you
it's
don't want any further
fantastic.
spoilers, because we will have some light spoilers here, we're not gonna obviously spoil the whole quest for you or anything like that, but we have to talk about certain things to allow us to kind of set up what the game is and what's going on. Um, so yeah, I would say that if you don't want any spoilers, this is a great game, and if you enjoyed something like Gears of War, you probably are going to enjoy this game. If you enjoyed playing World War Z, I think you'll definitely enjoy this game.
Yeah,
And if,
the swarm engine does a lot of things, and I think
it
it
does.
basically comes down to is if you watch one gameplay trailer and you're like that looks good, that's exactly what you're getting. Like it
Yes.
is, it's not trying to be anything more than that. Like there's no vehicle missions. You're not on the back of a tank
Yeah.
with a gun or anything like
And I
that. It
think
is the
there's one
same
line in
experience.
your review, and I didn't have it in mind, but I think you nailed it perfectly, that this game was exactly what I expected it to be based on what I had seen. You know,
Yeah,
it's yeah, so it's great in that sense. But now, Jeff, I think we should get into a little bit more like light spoilers. So, for people who maybe are familiar with the previous game and with Warhammer, why don't you tell us what is the story,
sure.
or at least the basic setup of the story in Space Marine 2 here?
Yeah. So I'm just gonna bring up my review just for context here. Um,
I think that while Jeff's doing that, it's also important to mention that this game, at least for the
Here we are.
main campaign, is probably somewhere between 8 and 12 hours, depending on what difficulty you're playing on.
Yeah, I would say like probably. Well, I mean, like, because that's like the campaign, and then you've got the 6 operation missions, which are about an
Yeah.
hour each. So you're
Yes.
looking at probably around about a 20-hour campaign if you're doing everything.
Yeah.
Because the operation missions are actually like missions that happen alongside the
Yeah.
campaign. Because
And
Titus
those
will
are
be
the
like,
ones that I unfortunately haven't been able to play at this point, just because matchmaking during the review period was very difficult.
yeah,
However, Jeff was lucky enough to play them, so he'll speak more about those
yeah,
later.
yeah. So this game basically is a sequel to Space Marine from 2011. So in Space Marine 2011, basically Titus of the Ultramarines was arrested on suspicion of heresy, given that he had resistance to chaos. Um, and so then, while he was eventually relieved of those charges, Inquisitor Thrax still imprisoned and tortured him for a century. So while Thrax would be silenced by his fellow Inquisitors on the charge of heresy himself, they would free Titus and allow him to return to his chapter. However, Titus chose a self-imposed penance, and then he joined the Death Watch because he believed that he had disgraced the chapter and himself. So Space Marine 2 takes place 200 years later, as Titus has been sent on a mission to defend the planet of Kadaku from the Tyranid threat. As the Hive Fleet Leviathan has invaded the Imperial controlled planet, Archmagus Nozick Beta 12 of the Adeptus Mechanicus has requested aid to protect a top secret project called Aurora. So Titus basically begins the descent on the planet. The ship that they're in basically gets attacked, and he's separated from his brothers, and he has to then complete the mission on his own, and set off a bomb essentially in the sky that would essentially slow down or kill a large portion of the Tyranid threat. So you go on that mission. It's a success, but the end of the mission deals with something extremely tragic for Titus, and it essentially will change his trajectory, his life going forward. And long story short, without spoiling that, he gets put back into essentially the Ultramarines. However, he is demoted to lieutenant. And then basically he's put in charge of 2 Marines, Chiron or whatever, and Gadriel. Chiron's kind of like, dude, you're Titus, you're fucking awesome. It's like, I can't wait to be here. Like, he's like that kind of like, he is like, that's a war hero. And so he's just excited to be there. Gadriel is like, this guy's a criminal. What the fuck's going on here? Like, he is very skeptical of Titus. Um, and they kind of come to blows, like kind of like a war of words essentially, because like Titus has information and he's not given it because the last time he did, he got in shit. So he doesn't trust them, and so this game is about forming those bonds between them all, as well as dealing with this Project Aurora, which is kind of the fate of the galaxy essentially rests on the success of them being able to control it, because it is like a weapon. You're muted.
These big men in blue armor have to go out and save everyone. Is essentially what you're saying.
Yeah, and like the thing about it is like there's so much that puts Titus on the path of being confused for corruption again, because like there's a lot that kind of goes on. There's like a scene literally where they like, I'll be very vague about it. They kill a very, very important person. And it's because of something that kind of happens, and that kind of even fuels that corruption even more. Um, and
Yeah.
it's like it's great. And I will say, like, if you've played Space Marine, there is a moment where a certain character will take off their helmet and you'll be like, it's that guy. If you have not played Space Marine 1, you will have no context for that at all.
Yeah. Yeah. I what I really liked was there were a lot more twists and turns in this narrative than I expected, and I
Yeah.
won't reveal what any of those are, but I genuinely was engaged by the story all the way through, like from that opening mission all the way through that main campaign that you
Yeah. And I'll
play
say,
as
like,
Titus there.
like
Loved it.
I mentioned in my review, like the the moments between Titus and Gadriel, especially, like Chiron has like his own kind of moment, you know, you'll know
Mhm,
exactly what I'm talking about.
mhm.
That was super fun. But Titus and Gadriel, like the kind of like the conflict between them, it
Yes,
was great.
very
It was
interesting.
fantastic. And like,
Even from the first interactions they have, right? It's
yeah,
just like you can tell that there's going to be tension there,
yeah.
and the way that that kind of, I guess, evolves over time, and the way that it plays out is very interesting. And
And like, I know,
one of the things that I want to kind of point out as well, because people may not be aware of this, but the voice actor for Titus has changed.
hmm,
It was originally in the first game, it was Mark Strong, who, has now been in many movies and things like that. A much bigger actor these days than he was back then. So he has been replaced by Clive Standen, I believe,
hmm,
um, who does an excellent job. But he
yeah.
isn't the only one. Like, this entire cast is very good, and
And like
they've done a good job here.
the like, I know a lot of people like when they'll play this game on any console or PC or whatever. I think the only graphical, I guess, disappointment, and I'm using that word like way more intense than it is that like the facial models and stuff are extremely low quality in regards to everything else in the game. But
Mhm.
you still can read Gadriel's face and know exactly what he's thinking
Yeah.
every second.
Yeah.
Um,
And also, I think that you are right when you say about how disappointment is maybe a strong word,
yeah,
because the thing is, the reason these faces stand out as maybe not as good is because the rest of the game is so beautiful. It's
yeah.
actually ridiculous.
And then you get like the cutscenes. Like there's about four,
Yeah.
maybe five
Of like the
cutscenes
pre
throughout the
rendered.
game that are pre-rendered, and
Yeah.
they are gorgeous.
But the transition between those and the gameplay always felt really odd to me because they look so good. And it's like
Yeah,
this game still looks great, but
because
the
like
way that
there's there's one there's one space marine that you see, and he's like way high up in the chain, and he's got these like guns on the bottom of his wrists. When I saw him, because you see him first through a cutscene, and then when you see his character model, you're like, that's not the same guy. like, like that's again, like the faces are the only part of that game that I can be like, yeah, they don't look that great.
Mhm.
Um, but the faces that needed to count, which was Titus and Gadriel, um, they work extremely good. Like you can
I
see like
agree.
all the subtleties and stuff like that, and like where the game ends
Speaking
up is
speaking of subtleties as well, one thing I noticed as we're on the visuals and stuff is like the subtle marks in the armor and the blemishes and things like that. It's like there is a really high level of detail here. Like the on PC especially, the game has its own setting for cloth simulation physics,
yeah.
and the way that the little bit of cloth moves on the back of your character is like we've seen it
Oh,
before in
just wait till you
games,
get some of
but
the other armor, because there's other armor that have like even more things. Um,
yeah,
but yeah, like the campaign is utterly fantastic.
it
Like
is.
it
I
is
agree.
it is completely action packed, and like some people, like I could see reviews going like, oh, it's the same 10 to 12 hours, you're doing the same things, you're killing the same things and stuff like that, but like that's the life of a space marine. It is
Yeah,
rinse and repeat. Like that is
yeah.
what it is. They serve the emperor by going
Mhm.
out and killing these enemies, and yeah, sure, the
Yeah.
enemy variety might be a little thin, but you're
I
also
also
fighting a
think
very particular force. They're not
the
going to
other
have
thing
that
is
variety.
the enemy variety we say it might be thin, but I don't think it's that bad.
I don't no
Like,
no like I'm saying, because like you basically take on like the Tyranids, you basically take on the Agents of Chaos, and then you basically take on the Thousand Sons. The Thousand Sons were the ones that have almost though that like Egyptian kind of look.
mhm.
Those guys there and stuff like that, and so like
And
you
what
have
I'd
these
say as
three
well,
tiers.
before we speak more about these characters, if you aren't familiar with Warhammer 40k and things, I do think that it's worth at least a little Google on the events of the first game if you haven't played it and things like that, just to get a little bit of lore, because there's a lot of, and I think Jeff mentions this in his review, there are a lot of terms and things that you will have no idea what's going on if you don't know anything. Do you know what I mean? Like, if you come in completely blind to what Warhammer is, there is going to be a little bit of confusion because this game expects you to have at least some level of knowledge about Warhammer.
Yeah, and Warhammer Space Marine 2011, it's backwards compatible on Xbox Series
Oh,
X.
is it? I didn't know that.
Yeah, the
Oh,
only thing is I don't believe it has co-op. I think it has multiplayer, but I
mhm.
don't think it has co-op through the campaign. It's been way too long since I played it, but I definitely want to go through it again, just because I remember absolutely loving it. But yeah, like the campaign is extremely good, and it kind of ends on a note where if they do end up doing more, it transfers into that
Yeah.
extremely nicely.
Yes.
Um, but
Um,
yeah, it's
there
great.
are obviously these additional missions that you have been able to
Yeah, so
play,
the operations mode.
and those are something that is being added to, right? That's been
Yeah.
announced.
So they'll add more operation missions, which will also have more enemy types, and
Yeah,
more locations. They may not necessarily take place on the same three planets, um,
yeah,
just because like it may tie into kind of how the game ends.
yeah,
Um, but yeah, like they're six missions. They're about an hour long, roughly, depending. They are a lot more challenging than the
yeah. I
main
couldn't
game.
even get past the
And
first mission on my own.
yeah,
So
they're way harder. And the reason for that is because Titus is a fucking badass. You're playing it basically as like one of like the I can't remember the name of it. It's like Astartes Adeptus or something like that.
Mhm.
And it's basically you play as kind of like a grunt soldier. So you're considerably weaker. You have less armor than Titus. You have
it's
about half
basically like
Titus'
a
armor.
created character, right? This is
Yeah, like you
how
don't
you,
create what their face looks like or anything. They're
but they are
predetermined that way.
essentially your. They're meant to be you in a way.
Yeah.
Like you have more control over
Yeah.
them and how they look and things like that, right?
And you'll unlock armor and stuff. Like basically every time you beat one of the missions, you get 35 points of armor data. It was 25 during the review period,
Mhm.
but they've upped it since the patch yesterday. They've upped it to 35, and then basically you use that those armor points to essentially level up your guns, spend it on
Yeah.
perks and stuff that make you
And
more powerful.
and while you're on that, I actually want to speak about the guns because that's one thing we haven't done yet. We spoke about the melee gameplay and how that works. And obviously the guns in the main campaign where you play as Titus are all very powerful and they're all very, like, to me they feel a little bit samey to use in terms of they don't sound that different and they don't, but there
Well,
are
yeah,
there
because like
are things they can do. Like, for example, you can pick up one rifle that has a grenade launcher attached, right?
yeah,
Or you can pick up one that is more like a sniper rifle, and things like that. But from a functional standpoint, they're all really powerful, so it doesn't really matter what weapon you have.
well, it depends on
However,
the range too.
mhm,
Because like some guns will have about the same attack power, but then some of them basically have like a weaker attack power, but the range is considerably more. Because like one
yes,
thing I mentioned on my review is it doesn't matter how accurate your gun is, there's an element of spray and pray
mhm,
because like these guns essentially are like heavy metal fantasy meets function. So like
yeah,
they're not meant to be like precise. Like you're not gonna get like something that is like, you know,
and also
realistic to us.
to be fair, you should be spraying and praying with the amount of enemies you're encountering most of the
Yeah.
time.
But like, yeah, so you have basically a variety of different bolt guns, because there's like stalker bolt guns and inquisitor
Yes.
bolt guns, instigator bolt guns. There's melta guns as well too, which just fire off like plasma rays essentially, where it just melts them off their bone. Um, like the guns, again, like the Space Marine thing is you have guns that are very similar to each other because if it ain't broke, don't fix it. So they haven't created this wealth of different guns because a Space
I
Marine
agree.
is like, I'm going to take this gun and I'm going to blow shit up. Like
Because
that
they
is
are the
the feeling of it.
powerful thing, right?
Yeah.
They don't necessarily even need the gun to do what they're doing here. But what I wanted to get to was how, and I know you mentioned this in your review as well, and obviously I can't speak on it because I haven't been able to play enough of the operations yet, but the guns feel somewhat different, right? Between when you are Titus and when you are kind
Yeah,
of your
they
own
do generally feel
character.
weaker, but as you like put more armor points in and then unlock the different currencies that allow you to break through to the different tiers, you
Hmm.
start changing and upgrading the guns, and eventually you get these guns that just look basically like someone crunched a mailbox, and
Yeah.
then like eventually you get them where they're like gold plated and they have like ribbons hanging all off them, and like it just looks so fucking gorgeous. Because like I played Darktide, and the same thing there is like you're leveling up guns, you're getting different
Yeah.
skins and things like that. That it just looks fucking cool. You
Hmm.
have all of that here,
Yeah.
and like so we'll go into operations here. So operations basically is you're allowed to pick 6 different classes to essentially um, kind of work through them. And I ended up picking the Vanguard. I'm just scrolling through my review to find the classes. I picked the Vanguard, and the Vanguard basically has like a grappling hook. Um, and so essentially you can grapple towards an enemy and then just go right into like a melee assault or something like that. So you have tactical, assault, vanguard, bulwark, sniper, and heavy. Um, and you each one of those classes has a main and sub weapon and a melee weapon that are kind of unique to them, and you can kind of work into certain aspects of it. Like as a vanguard, you're never going to get the power sword. You're basically going to get the knife, or you're going to get the chain sword. And then as the heavy, you'll have like, or as one of the other ones, you'll have like the hammer and whatnot, or the bulwark, you have a sword and shield. So like there's different classes, and each one of those classes has a different ability as well too. So that's things like the heavy has like a shield that will like stop incoming fire. Then you'll have ones that kind of rally up and refill your armor, and then like the sniper can cloak, and then once they attack it, they appear. So it's a good kind of escapism kind of class where if you're getting overrun, you can basically cloak and then run away. um, and so you basically pick one of these classes to go through the operations mode. And the operations mode are story bits throughout the campaign where titles will be like, you, that squad, I need you to go up and I need you to take this and I need you to do that. And like, that's what those missions are. And so when you're in those missions, you'll hear Titus in your ear going like, we've made it to the castle, whatever, like that. We need you to do this and stuff like that. Or like your guy will be like, hey, we've killed them. And then Titus will be like, no, the
So,
swarm is
so
still
you
active.
may
You
as
haven't killed
well.
them yet.
So you may as well think of it like these missions are the way I put it, based on what I know of them from what I was able to sort of do. They coincide with the main story
Yeah.
itself, and you're basically playing a support role, if you will, in the main story, but these things will be added to, right? So because they're going to be added to, there's potentially going to be extra little bits of story within them and extra lore and all that kind of thing. But what I want to ask you, Jeff, is at the moment, there's obviously only 6 missions. How much replay value and replayability do you think there is in those 6 missions? Because my understanding is this could be quite grindy to get the resources you need to upgrade and things like that,
Well,
right?
the one thing that's really nice is there's some of the outfits and stuff you can get from completing like tons of these operation missions or winning matches in Eternal War. So you can kind of like bleed those together. And I think honestly, like I love playing these operation missions like to the point where like I wouldn't be a bit surprised if a month from now I've played some of them like 20 or 30 times basically. Because like I want to like upgrade my stuff, because the nice thing about is all the cosmetics and things that you unlock during the operations mode, they will transfer over into the Eternal War mode. And the Eternal War has its own set of skins and stuff like that as well too, where you can literally dress like your Marine up in the colors of chaos and the colors of like the heretics and stuff like that. But I haven't been able to matchmake and play into those into that mode yet. So I don't know how it what it affects in terms of like those armor data points,
Yeah.
or the
The
points that
same the
you.
same with me. The player numbers were just very limited for this review
I didn't have
period.
any.
And because there was no crossplay during the review period as well, me and Jeff weren't even able to play together, which made things slightly
And the
harder.
crossplay is weird, and I understand why. So in the operations mode, you can play crossplay with everyone, PlayStation, PC, whatever. Eternal War is basically you can play with other console players, or on PC you can play with other PC players. So PC has Steam and Epic, console has PlayStation and Xbox, um, and that's basically it. But again, because crossplay kind of hasn't been enabled, I've been able to matchmake. Like I've played 2 full operations mode with a full 3-player squad. And then the other ones I've either beat solo, I beat 2 or 3 of them solo, and then the other ones I played with at least one other player. The one thing that is unfortunate is when you're playing in operations mode, each player cannot be the same class. So if you've been working on your Vanguard, like myself, and you pair up and there's another Vanguard, it'll say basically one player has to change.
So you should maybe think about kind of leveling up at least 2 classes.
Yeah, and the thing with it as well too is like when you get to a certain point, you'll unlock trials. Now the trials can only be played when you're not matchmaking because they're a single player type of thing. And the trials basically are small little objective things that you can do that will earn you more of those armor data points. And if you get the lowest time, so the highest score, you'll unlock the little currency points you need to then jump to the next tier. Um, and then when you jump to the next tier, it'll give you 2 guns or 3 guns or 1 gun or whatever to choose basically where you want to go. Do you want more range? Do you want more damage? Things like that. And then you can reset those points if you go the other way. Then there's a secondary type of thing for your weapon where you can pick these passive or offensive buffs that then further that along. So there's a lot of customization. Each Space Marine has like 25 different perks that you can work along as well too that are exclusive to each class. There's a ton of customization. You can change basically like the symbol on your pauldron. You can change the pauldrons. You can change the backpack thing. You can change the helmet. You can change the chest piece. You can change the boots, the gloves, like basically everything. And if you look at screenshots of this game, you'll see them like draped in fabric and like basically almost looks like they have like a barbecue grill basically stamped like on their chest. Like it, it the customization in this game is really really good. I think it's just as good as Darktide, which is another Warhammer 40K game. But that one doesn't have any Space Marines because you're just it's almost like a Suicide Squad game where like you have these misfits essentially put out on missions and stuff.
Yeah.
But yeah, the operations mode is super good. Like the missions are interesting. Like there's a part in the main campaign where you're waiting for a ship to do something, and in one of those operation modes, you're getting that ship operative,
Yeah.
operative.
I look forward to finally being able to actually play these missions, hopefully very soon. Um, but I want to move on now to some issues that I personally had with the game, and I don't know if Jeff had any, but I had a few issues. And first of all, I want to say about the accessibility because while there are some basic settings available here, I do think that for a game in 2024, this is a very bare bones accessibility offering. You'll still get like your colorblind mode and subtitle options, things like that, but there's not really much else in there. Like, you can toggle a few things from sort of like, rather than holding the button, you have to press the button if that's easier for you. But I do think there's a lot more that they could do when we look at, and I know that this game's not made on the same budget, of course, but when we look at the recent Star Wars Outlaws, the level of accessibility there is so much higher in what you can do and the way that you can change certain things in the game that I do think, I found that a little bit disappointing. I was still able to play it absolutely fine, but at the moment there are lots of people that have some sort of additional needs that I don't think would be able to play this game, and that's unfortunate because it's a great game. So I did have a problem with that. Um, and then outside of that, and I'll get Jeff to speak about how the game was technically on console in a moment, but on PC, I kind of had a 50-50 technical experience. And what I mean by that is the frame rates were actually really solid. So I played on the ultra preset for graphics with the default mode, which is DLSS quality upscaling. Um, and on my rig, which has a 4080 Super in it, 32 gigs of RAM, and a 14900K processor. Obviously, I've got a very powerful rig, and I was able to get between 85 and 100 FPS in basically the entire game, with very little CPU usage as well. So there's probably headroom for even more than that with some tweaking of the settings and things like that. The actual frame rate performance is very, very good. And if you've got a TV with VRR or a monitor with VRR, that's well within the range of like VRR. You'll be able to get a really smooth experience out of that. And then last night, when I was playing a bit with our friend Keith, who just started playing the game because he got his code a bit later than us, he decided to push the game as far as he could, and he had it with no DLSS on the absolute highest settings that he could, and he capped the game at 60 just to see what whether there would be any drops from 60 at native rendering and everything. And from what he was telling me, there were no frame drops whatsoever. So I'm assuming, based on the experience I've had on that side on PC, that the actual frame rates and stuff are okay on console, right, Jeff?
Yeah, the optimization seems really, really good. I had one crash. That was basically it.
So that was my one negative as well. On a technical front, there is something about audio that I'll mention in a minute, but I did have the game kind of soft locked twice, and I had to force it to close. But it was always weirdly at the end of a mission on the loading screen. Like, I would just soft lock on the loading screen, um, and it happened twice. Uh, I do know that on PC specifically, they are aware of certain things that will make the game crash, and they're already working on that. So hopefully, I can't speak to if you're playing during the early access period, but by the time the full release comes, I believe on the 9th of September, that is, hopefully the day one patch will fix those issues at least, because they're already aware of them and have been aware of them for a couple of weeks, is my understanding. But yeah, I'm
yeah,
glad to hear the optimization is good on
yeah.
console.
Like there's, I think it's quality and speed. I think is what they're labeled as. So I played on the speed one because like it just felt a little better, so I think it runs at 60. I don't have
It,
any,
it,
tech to basically tell
yeah.
me any different, but like
It probably does, or that's probably at least what they're aiming for.
yeah,
Um,
but
which is good.
yeah, I never had any like performance issues or anything like that. Like it ran extremely good. Um, like when you're like fast traveling between like the parts on the battle barge and stuff like that, it's instant.
Yes.
Um,
Yeah.
but no, it's really good. The load times, like I like how they're like the sky is just like a mission briefing on the ship. So the same
Yeah,
thing as
that's
like
good. I really like that.
exact same thing as Dark Tide.
Yeah.
And so yeah, like it ran extremely good. Like it didn't matter how many
I
enemies were
agree.
coming at me and stuff. It just looked gorgeous. It ran great. Like the swarm engine is just really good. I didn't notice any type of pop in whatsoever, no matter
So I
where.
did, but only in one specific scene, and I noticed it even when I replayed this mission with Keith last night. Um, After you get to the battle barge, when you go on that first mission with your two squad mates there, and you start speaking in the aircraft, and there's a camera cut, and on a specific camera cut, the guy's armor always pops in like half a second after the camera goes to him.
Hmm.
And I don't know what that might be specific to PC, but given that I have experienced it in that scene twice, that's something to be aware of. But that was the only instance of pop in that I noticed. And
Yeah,
given how much detail is on the screen most of the time, I think that's something to be applauded, quite frankly.
yeah. Like honestly, like negative my only negative has nothing to do with the game. It has to do with the presentation given to review access in regards to not giving us the ability of playing Eternal War. Like, I get that the team and stuff and everything that's working on like that, but like, I've seen other games basically where the devs were just filling servers up so that people could
So
play.
that you could access it. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
like the fact that we have no access to Eternal War whatsoever, to me is just dumb. It's
Yeah.
absolutely stupid. So to me, the only downside that I've had basically is from a presentation standpoint of how reviewers are supposed to experience the content
Yeah.
for review.
Yeah, because it's been harder. Obviously, you managed to play those 6 operation missions as well, but it has been harder to kind of cover as much of this game as possible because of the limited matchmaking and
Yeah.
things like that, right? So I sort of agree with you on that for sure. There is one more small issue that I noticed, and it is one that's overcome. Like you can overcome it, but by default, at least when playing without a headset on, I think the audio mix at times can be quite bad. Um, and what I mean by that is when you're kind of traversing, not necessarily in cutscenes, but when you are traversing, music or sound effects can often, I found by default, at least on PC,
Mm.
overpower sort of some dialogue that happens while you're
Where I
going
never
around.
had that. Yeah.
That's interesting. And like I said, you can obviously, as with all games, adjust the audio settings to kind of make that easier. But it was something that consistently happened in multiple instances, not just on one level or anything like that. So I think it is something to be aware of for people who maybe are particularly sensitive to certain audio issues, because I do think something is slightly off with the audio mix. Um, However, if you play with a headset on, it's fantastic. So I would actually recommend playing with a headset on because that's going to give you the highest quality audio anyway, right? And the audio experience here, like we didn't even speak about the music or anything, but I love the music. I think all the sound effects are great. When you're doing these like execution moves on different enemies, they sound as brutal as they look.
Hmm.
If you know what
Yeah.
I mean.
Yeah, the sound design in the game is really good, especially because again, like it's everything about this game is very chunky, and
Mhm.
like even the sound effects and stuff like that are like that. Like when you're like, there's one screenshot that I took that I really really liked. It was where I was like fighting one of these big guys that had these like talons that were basically like 12 feet long, and you just grab it and then you just shove it in their face, and like even the sound from all of that is just so good.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. As we sort of come towards the end of this shorter episode here, is there anything else you'd like to mention about the game, Jeff?
I don't think so. I think that's pretty much everything. Like I'm excited to kind of dive into the customization a little bit further. Try the multiplayer and see how that kind of goes. But yeah, no, like it. The scale of this game is tremendous. Like the levels are what you want from a Warhammer. Like there's,
Yeah,
manufactorums. Like there's like the cathedrals. Like there's all of the touchstones that Warhammer is kind of known for. And it does extremely well. I think the boss fights are super fun. Like there's a lot of enemies that like dive into the ground or like cloak or like these big giant like just beasts that like are like their shoulder width is like 17 feet or something, and they have like
mhm.
a little tiny head.
Yeah.
Um,
The ones that do you know the one enemy that really annoyed me, and it was a one that you encounter quite early on, but you do encounter multiple times,
the
and
lictors.
I don't know their official name, so please forgive me. But basically, they grab you. They dive under the and they grab you, and you have to like move the left stick
Yeah,
around to get free.
I think that's the lictors and whatever. The only ones that pissed me off all the time, they didn't make me like angry or anything, or like fuck this game or anything. It's when you have to fight two of those little floating guys and they keep swapping invulnerability back and forth,
Yeah.
and then then they fire these blasts that are like, so
Oh,
like
the
if
other
you get
one that
hit
was
by
quite
one, you're getting hit
the
by all three, because by the time that Titus gets back up,
and when we say that these enemies annoy us, it's just that they are difficult to deal with. It's not that they make us not want to play the game, because there are these little sort of green floaty guys as well that will blow up with basically poison in your face, right?
yeah,
And you can only dodge them, you can't parry them. But the problem is because there's so many of them, sometimes you'll dodge and then you'll still get hit by another one anyway. So
yeah,
it's like, and once you get hit by one, because it sort of stuns you and momentarily allows you not to move quite as quickly, you end up getting hit by multiple, and that killed me a few times there.
yeah, and like the enemies are the allies are good to get you back up. The reviving stuff's fine. The one
Yes.
thing that was sort of weird though is like um there'll be parts where like you'll die and then there'll be like a timer that goes like 55, 54, 53, and then it'll just go game over.
I never encountered that because you told me about that, and I never ever had that problem.
Yeah,
But
I it
maybe I
never
just didn't.
counted down.
That's interesting.
I don't know if
Hopefully
it was
they
a glitch
fix
or
that.
anything, but I've noticed since the patch came out that certain things have changed. Like when you're selecting one of your loadouts from the pods, it doesn't
Hmm.
fade to black and then go back to the screen anymore.
Yeah,
And I've noticed that I have more revives in regards to like where I don't get that mortal wound anymore.
good,
Um,
good.
but yeah, I it's not a massive negative, but I will say like the AI isn't great on the harder difficulties. Like
Interesting. I
it,
haven't tried the really hard ones yet. I did play this game on normal because that's what it defaults to, and I always like to have the default experience during a review period just because I think that that's how the majority of people will probably play the game. So it's interesting to hear that the AI isn't great in those higher
yeah, because
difficulties.
like it almost seems like the enemies ignore most of the AI. Like they generally just come for you. Um, but yeah, like honestly, there there's very little that I could even really criticize in this game. Like
Mhm.
this is exactly what I wanted from Space Marine 2. Like exactly. Like it's got an amazing campaign. The 6
Yeah.
operation missions are absolutely so much fun, and I can't wait to kind of dive into the multiplayer and see what that's like, to unlock
Absolutely.
more skins and stuff. And like all the content that's coming out later on is completely free. There is a season pass that is cosmetic based, so you'll get some cosmetics that are
Mhm.
only part of the season pass. Um,
Well,
it is sort of
hopefully
weird
you
that you
can
still
help me
have to
play these
unlock
6
them.
missions as well.
Yeah, like I said, like my roommate's home, so we're going to be playing through the
Mhm.
game, and if we can play all those 6 missions back to back to back to back to back to back to back,
Yeah.
um,
And one thing to say as well, because that kind of brings to an end our video review here, our review discussion. But you can, of course, see both of our reviews linked below, because they should both be out at the embargo time, which will be the same time as this video, hopefully. Um, but also, make sure you subscribe to our channel. But like I said, head over to the Outer Havens YouTube channel as well, which I will link below, because Keith is going to have some additional video footage over there if you actually want to see gameplay. And I think that me and him are also talking about potentially streaming the game later today, which we are actually allowed to do after the embargo. So, keep an eye out for that as well. But I will also announce it on my Twitter/X account. So make sure you look for that. And Jeff, what do you want to say there?
the one thing that I will say is like, while my review will be out today, it will not be scored. Not until I have a chance of actually playing the Eternal War PvP. So it will be kind of our first review in progress.
Yeah.
So the review will be out, and it will talk about everything except for Eternal War. And then once I've had a chance there, which hopefully will be probably this like Friday or the weekends and stuff like that,
Mhm.
I will be attaching the score as well as talking about Eternal War as well too,
Yeah.
just because I want to make sure that I am speaking to everything that this game
Everything in the
offers.
game. Yeah.
Because the PvP is a massive part of this game. Like it's got 3
Mhm.
different modes. Like you can,
Yeah.
um, you
I
know,
mean, mine will be scored, but that's just to do with the way that Outer Haven does things. However, my review will also be updated once I'm able to play these other 6 missions and also the PvP, as Jeff says. Because those are significant chunks of the game that I unfortunately was not able to experience yet. So just keep that in mind when you are thinking about picking up this game. But what I would say is, even outside of that, if you just want a very good single player campaign experience, this is a great one in this game here. Like, it really
yeah, it's
is
incredible.
great. So I would highly recommend, based on the portions of the game that I have played, I would highly recommend playing this game. I think it's great. It's one of the best action games this year, I think. Um, so yeah, that brings to an end our review for now. We will be back later in the week with an additional episode, which is also going to be a bit shorter, but is going to be covering this week's news. So please look out for that. But for now, it's a goodbye from me.